56 experts failed, then a black Maid solved it in 1 minute, and the CEO broke down in tears. The conference room smelled of cold coffee and desperation. Cameron Doyle stared at the wall of whiteboards covered in equations that looked more like ancient hieroglyphics than engineering solutions. Red X marks crossed out failed attempt after failed attempt. 56 of them, to be exact. Run it again. Cameron's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Dr. Sarachin, the lead biomechanics engineer, exchanged glances with the team. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. They'd all been pulling 18-hour days for months. Cameron, we've run the simulation 47 times today alone. The result is always the same. Then run it 48 times. The mobility chair sat in the center of the testing lab like an expensive monument to failure. Its sleek titanium frame gleamed under the fluorescent lights, sensors blinking like tiny stars across its surface. Every curve had been calculated, every joint precision engineered. It was beautiful. It was revolutionary. And it was broken. Cameron watched through the observation window as the automated testing arm placed a 180-pound weight in the chair. The machine began its programmed sequence: forward, backward, gentle left turn. Everything looked perfect until the 15-degree right turn. The chair tilted, sensors screaming warnings as it nearly toppled over. Damn it! Cameron slammed his fist against the glass. This wasn't just another product for Dynatech Industries. This was personal. 3 years ago, his mother, Eleanor, had lost her battle with the complications from her car accident, the same accident that had left her paralyzed from the waist down. In her final weeks, confined to a basic hospital wheelchair, she'd whispered to him, "Cam, someday you'll make me fly." He'd promised her he would. The memory burned in his chest as he turned back to his team. 56 experts had worked on this project. MIT graduates, former NASA engineers, biomechanics specialists from Johns Hopkins. Together, they represented over 400 years of combined experience and 17 different advanced degrees. And they couldn't solve a balance problem. "The torque calculations are perfect," muttered James Rodriguez, the senior software engineer, scrolling through lines of code on his laptop. "Angular velocity compensation is within 0.002 degrees of optimal. The gyroscopic stabilizers are functioning exactly as designed. Then why does it keep failing?" Cameron's voice rose, causing several team members to flinch. Dr. Chin pulled up the diagnostics on the main screen. "The sensors detect the imbalance 0.3 seconds before the tilt begins. The motors engage precisely on schedule. The algorithm adjusts the center of gravity perfectly according to our calculations. By every measurement we have, this should work." Cameron ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing over the past months. His once pristine office suits had given way to wrinkled shirts and coffee stains. He'd missed his nephew's birthday party, forgotten about dinner plans with investors, and hadn't returned his sister's calls in 2 weeks. The board meeting was tomorrow. Richard Blackstone, the chairman, had made it clear during their last conversation. "Cameron, I understand this is personal for you, but we've invested $12.8 million in R&D. If we can't get a working prototype by month's end, we need to redirect resources to projects that actually generate revenue." $12.8 million. Cameron knew the exact figure because he'd fought for every penny of it. He presented PowerPoint slides filled with market research showing the $4.2 billion mobility device industry. He'd shown projections of how their revolutionary chair could capture 15% market share within 5 years. He'd promised investors a return that would make their heads spin. What he hadn't told them was that late at night, when the building was empty and only the security lights hummed in the corridors, he would sit in the testing lab and talk to the chair as if his mother could hear him. "I know you're in there somewhere, Mom. I know you want to fly." Now, watching another failed test, Cameron felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had sitting in that hospital room, watching machines keep his mother alive while her spirit dimmed a little more each day. "Sir?" Dr. Chen's voice seemed to come from far away. "Should we run another diagnostic on the sensor array?" Cameron looked around the room at his team. These brilliant minds had given him everything they had. They'd worked weekends, missed family dinners, and sacrificed sleep. They tried adjusting motor response times by milliseconds, recalibrating sensors to detect movements smaller than a human hair's width, and rewriting algorithms that could predict a user's intentions before they even knew what they wanted to do. Nothing worked. "No," Cameron said finally. "Everyone go home. Get some sleep. We'll..." He paused, the words sticking in his throat like broken glass. "We'll reassess in the morning?" As the team filed out, murmuring quiet conversations about backup plans and resume updates, Cameron remained at the observation window. The chair sat motionless in the testing area, its sensors now dark, waiting for another chance to fail. Somewhere in the building's ventilation system, a fan hummed with the same rhythm his mother's breathing machine had made during those final nights. Cameron pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would have to face the board. Tomorrow, he would have to explain how 56 of the brightest engineering minds had spent months chasing a problem they couldn't solve. Tomorrow, he would have to admit that maybe some promises were too big to keep. But tonight, the building would be empty except for the security guards and the overnight cleaning crew. Tonight, he could sit with his failure in peace. The fluorescent lights automatically dimmed to energy-saving mode, casting the lab in shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a floor buffer whirred against linoleum, and Cameron could hear the faint sound of someone humming, a melody he couldn't quite place but that seemed familiar, like a song from a dream he'd almost forgotten. It was 11:47 p.m. when Cameron finally emerged from the conference room, his shoulders sagging under the weight of another failed day. The Dynatech building transformed after hours, the bustling energy of daytime replaced by the quiet hum of computers in sleep mode and the distant sound of vacuum cleaners. He'd sent his team home 3 hours ago, but sleep felt impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that chair tilting, heard the warning beeps, felt the crushing weight of another failure. So he paced. Up and down the corridors, past darkened offices where motivational posters about innovation and excellence seemed to mock him in the emergency lighting. Torque differential, angular momentum compensation. He muttered to himself, the technical terms tumbling from his lips like a broken prayer. The gyroscopic sensors should compensate for lateral force displacement before any significant tilt occurs. That's when he noticed her. She moved through the shadows like she belonged there, pushing a yellow mop bucket on wheels that squeaked with each rotation. Her navy blue uniform was crisp despite the late hour, and she wore her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun secured with what looked like a pencil. She couldn't have been taller than 5'4", but there was something about the way she carried herself, steady, purposeful, unrushed, that made the space around her feel calmer. Cameron had been CEO of Dynatech for 4 years, but he realized with uncomfortable clarity that he'd never actually spoken to any of the cleaning staff. They were part of the building's ecosystem, like the HVAC system or the security cameras, essential but invisible. The woman looked up as his pacing brought him closer to where she was mopping the floor near the engineering lab. Her eyes were deep brown, lined with the kind of creases that spoke of years spent smiling, though her expression now was thoughtfully neutral. "Evening, Mr. Doyle," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that softened the edges of her words. Cameron stopped mid-pace, surprised. "You know my name?" A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Hard to miss the man who's been walking these halls every night for the past 2 months, talking to himself about velocities and such." She dipped her mop in the bucket, wringing it out with practiced efficiency. "I'm Marla Jean Washington. Been cleaning these floors for 6 years now." 6 years? Cameron tried to process this. 6 years of her witnessing his company's late-night dramas, his team's celebrations and defeats, his own gradual transformation from confident CEO to obsessed insomniac. 6 years? He repeated, more to himself than to her. Marla Jean continued mopping, the rhythmic swish of the mop against linoleum somehow soothing. "Seen a lot of brilliant folks come through these doors. Watched them get all wound up about problems that seemed impossible." She paused, looking at him with those steady brown eyes. You're working on that chair, aren't you? The one that keeps tipping over? Cameron's mouth fell open slightly. How do you? Buildings got thin walls, and voices carry at night. Plus, I clean around that testing lab every evening. Seen you in there plenty of times, just staring at that machine like it personally offended you. Heat rose in Cameron's cheeks. How many nights had he been completely unaware of her presence? How many times had she cleaned around his scattered papers and empty coffee cups while he'd been lost in his technical obsession? It's supposed to be revolutionary, he found himself saying, though he wasn't sure why he was explaining himself to the cleaning lady. Self-balancing mobility assistance with predictive movement algorithms. It should be able to anticipate a user's intentions and adjust accordingly. Marla Jean nodded thoughtfully, as if this made perfect sense to her. Sounds mighty complicated. It is. 56 experts have worked on it. MIT graduates, former NASA engineers. Cameron's voice trailed off as he heard himself reciting the same credentials he'd been clinging to for months. 56, huh? Marla Jean's tone was matter-of-fact, not impressed or intimidated. That's a lot of smart people. The smartest, Cameron said, then immediately felt foolish for the defensive edge in his voice. Marla Jean stopped mopping and leaned on her mop handle, studying him with the kind of attention that made him feel like she was seeing something others had missed. You know what I've noticed in my 6 years here? Sometimes the smartest folks are the ones who can't see what's right in front of them. Cameron was about to ask what she meant when she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. You ever just check if the floor is level? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Cameron's brain, so accustomed to complex calculations and multivariable equations, seemed to short-circuit trying to process such a simple query. The floor? He repeated. Marla Jean set down her mop and walked past him toward the testing lab, her bucket wheels squeaking in a rhythm that suddenly reminded him of something, though he couldn't place what. She stopped at the observation window and peered through the glass at the chair sitting in its designated testing area. That's a beautiful machine, she said softly. But you're not talking about the building's foundation, are you, Mr. Doyle? Cameron stared at Marla Jean through the observation window, his mind racing to decode her words. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean about the floor. Without waiting for permission, Marla Jean pushed open the lab door, a door that required a security badge Cameron realized she must have had all along. The motion sensors detected her presence, and the overhead lights flickered to full brightness, casting harsh shadows across the testing area. May I? She asked, though she was already walking toward the chair. Cameron followed her, his heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Ms. Washington, this is a highly sensitive piece of equipment. The sensors alone cost more than most folks make in a year, I imagine. She interrupted gently, but her attention wasn't on him. She circled the chair slowly, like a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. Her weathered hands stayed clasped behind her back, careful not to touch anything. You're 56 experts, she said, still circling. They spent a lot of time looking at the inside of this machine, didn't they? All those computers and algorithms and such? Of course. That's where the problem is. The balance calculations, the sensor integration, the motor response timing. Marla Jean stopped at the rear of the chair and knelt down, her knees creaking slightly. And they ran all sorts of tests on computers? Thousands of simulations. Every possible scenario. But did any of them ever just roll it around? The question was so absurd that Cameron almost laughed. Roll it around? Ms. Washington, this chair has been tested by automated systems designed to replicate human movement patterns with precision. That's not what I asked? Her voice remained patient, but there was something firm underneath it. Did any of your 56 experts ever just put their hands on it and push it around the room like a regular person would? Cameron opened his mouth to say yes, of course they had, but the words died in his throat. Had they? He tried to remember seeing any of his team actually manually moving the chair during their countless tests. Everything had been done through computerized testing protocols, robotic arms, and automated sequences. I'm not sure. Marla Jean nodded as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. She placed her hands on the chair's armrests and gave it a gentle push forward. It rolled smoothly across the polished concrete floor. Then she pulled it backward. Again, smooth movement. Now watch, she said, and began to turn the chair in a slow circle to the left. Perfect rotation. Then she reversed direction, turning it slowly to the right. Cameron saw it immediately, a barely perceptible wobble, so slight it would never register on sensors calibrated for major movements. The chair didn't roll in a perfect circle. Instead, it traced a path that was off by maybe an inch, creating a subtle but consistent instability. Do you see it? Marla Jean asked. There's a slight deviation in the rotation pattern, Cameron whispered, his engineer's brain suddenly firing on all cylinders. But that's impossible. We laser-leveled the entire testing area. The floor variance is less than 1 millimeter across the entire surface. Marla Jean smiled and walked to the rear of the chair. She knelt down again and pointed to the 4 wheels. Mr. Doyle, come look at this. Cameron crouched beside her, and she guided his gaze to where the rear wheels met the floor. What do you see? He stared at the 2 wheels, both appearing identical, both in perfect contact with the ground. They look fine. The wheel assemblies are precision manufactured. Each one was tested individually before installation. Look closer. Not at the wheels themselves. Cameron squinted, and then he saw it, or rather, he saw what he wasn't seeing. The left rear wheel sat flush against the floor, but the right rear wheel had the tiniest gap underneath it. So small it was barely visible, perhaps no more than the thickness of a sheet of paper. That's impossible, he breathed. The chair was assembled on a precision jig. Every component was measured and verified. Things settle, Marla Jean said simply. Especially when they'd been moved around as much as this one has. Lifted on and off testing platforms, rolled back and forth across different surfaces. She reached into her mop bucket and pulled out a small metal washer, the kind used in basic plumbing repairs. My daddy fixed wheelbarrows for 30 years down in Alabama. Taught me that sometimes the fanciest problems have the simplest solutions. Cameron watched in stunned silence as she lifted the rear right wheel slightly and slipped the washer underneath it. The tiny metal ring, probably worth less than 5 cents, disappeared beneath the wheel. Try rolling it now, she said, standing up and brushing off her knees. With trembling hands, Cameron grasped the chair's armrests and began to move it in a circle. Left then right. Perfect rotation in both directions. No wobble. No deviation. Run your computer test, Marla Jean said quietly. Cameron's hands shook as he activated the automated testing sequence. The robotic arm lowered the test weight into the seat. The chair began its programmed movements: forward, backward, left turn, right turn. No alarms. No warning lights. No tilting. Perfect balance. The diagnostic screen lit up with green checkmarks across every parameter. For the first time in months, every single measurement fell within optimal ranges. I don't understand, Cameron whispered, staring at the screen. 56 engineers. Hundreds of hours of simulation. Millions of dollars in diagnostic equipment. Marla Jean was already walking back toward her mop bucket. Some things don't need Wi-Fi, Mr. Doyle. Cameron stood frozen in the testing lab, watching the perfect diagnostic readings scroll across his screen. Green lights blinked where red warnings had flashed for months. The chair sat motionless now, balanced and stable, mocking the complexity he'd wrapped around such a simple problem. Wait! He called out as Marla Jean reached for her mop handle. His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. I need to. How did you know to look there? The wheel alignment? Marla Jean paused, her back still to him. For a long moment, the only sound in the lab was the quiet hum of computers and the distant buzz of fluorescent lights. When she turned around, something had shifted in her expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. I told you my daddy fixed wheelbarrows, she said quietly. But that's not the whole truth. Cameron waited, sensing that whatever she was about to say would change everything. I used to work at Mercy General Hospital. Night shift, same as here. Clean rooms in the long-term care ward. Her voice grew softer, more careful. Room 314. I remember it well because the number matched my old apartment building back in Montgomery. The blood drained from Cameron's face. Room 314. His mother's room. You, he whispered. I remember your mama, Mr. Doyle. Eleanor. Sweet lady with the prettiest silver hair and eyes just like yours. Marla Jean's own eyes glistened as she spoke. I cleaned her room every night for the last 8 months she was there. She'd always be awake when I came in around midnight, staring out that window like she was looking for something. Cameron's legs felt weak. He gripped the edge of the testing table to steady himself. You knew my mother? Knew her? Child, I talked to her every single night. The nurses, bless their hearts, they'd do their medical checking and chart updating, but they didn't have time for conversation. Your mama was lonely, Mr. Doyle. Lonely and scared and trying so hard to be brave for everyone who came to visit. The room seemed to spin around Cameron. All those nights he'd sat beside his mother's bed, holding her hand, promising her that everything would be okay. All those days when he'd had to leave for meetings, for business trips, for the endless demands of running a company. He'd never known about the quiet conversations happening in the darkness after visiting hours ended. She used to hum. Marla Jean continued, and suddenly Cameron recognized the melody he'd been hearing in the hallways, the same tune that had drifted through the building tonight. Gospel songs, mostly. Amazing Grace, how great thou art. But sometimes she'd hum something else, something that seemed to come from somewhere deeper. Lullabies, Cameron said, his voice barely audible. She used to sing me lullabies when I was little. That's right. And while she hummed, she'd tell me about her son, the brilliant boy who was going to change the world. She'd show me pictures of you graduating from MIT, getting your first patent, starting your company. Marla Jean took a step closer. But you know what she talked about most? Cameron shook his head, afraid to speak. She'd tell me about the day you promised to make her fly again. How you'd knelt right there beside her hospital bed and sworn that someday, somehow, you'd build something that would give her back her freedom. Marla Jean's voice grew stronger. She'd look out that window at the birds landing on the fire escape and say, my Cam's going to make me fly someday. He doesn't know it yet, but this isn't about chairs or machines. It's about keeping promises to the people we love. Tears were streaming down Cameron's face now, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. She never told me you two talked. She didn't want you to worry about her being lonely. You had enough on your shoulders, trying to save the world one invention at a time. Marla Jean smiled through her own tears. But she'd watch you during visiting hours, see how tired you were, how hard you were pushing yourself. She'd tell me, that boy's going to work himself to death trying to fix things that aren't broken. Someone needs to teach him that the best solutions are usually the simplest ones. Cameron laughed through his tears, a sound that was half sob, half wonder. She was still trying to parent me from a hospital bed. That's what mothers do, honey. Even when their bodies fail them, their hearts keep working overtime. Marla Jean walked back toward the chair, placing her hand gently on its armrest. She used to study this old wheelchair they had her in, manual push, nothing fancy. But sometimes late at night, when she thought no one was looking, she tried to make it rock back and forth, like she was pretending it could dance. Dance? Cameron's voice broke on the word. She told me that before the accident, you two used to dance in the kitchen while she cooked Sunday dinner. She'd put on old Motown records and you'd spin her around until you both got dizzy. Marla Jean looked at him with infinite tenderness. She said the thing she missed most wasn't walking, it was dancing with her boy. Cameron closed his eyes, remembering. The smell of her famous pot roast, the sound of Diana Ross on the radio, his mother's laughter as he dipped her dramatically while she still held a wooden spoon covered in gravy. She used to say you'd make her fly someday, Marla Jean continued. But I think what she really meant was that you'd help her dance again. The testing lab fell silent except for the gentle hum of the now perfectly functioning chair. Cameron stood there, tears still wet on his cheeks, staring at the machine that had consumed his life for the past year. It looked different now, not like a monument to failure or a testament to his engineering prowess, but like what it had always been meant to be, a promise kept. "I should call the team," he said suddenly, reaching for his phone. "Dr. Chin, James, all of them. They need to see this. They need to know." "Mr. Doyle." Marla Jean's voice was gentle but firm. "When's the last time you actually sat in that chair?" The question stopped him mid-dial. Cameron looked up from his phone, confused. "Sat in it? We have protocols. Safety requirements. The testing sequences are designed to." "That's not what I asked?" Marla Jean moved to stand beside the chair, her hand resting on its armrest like she was introducing him to an old friend. "Your mama's been waiting 3 years for you to keep your promise. Don't you think it's time you found out if it actually works?" Cameron's mouth went dry. "But the weight distribution parameters haven't been calibrated for my specific." "Honey," Marla Jean interrupted with a knowing smile. "Sometimes you engineers think too much." She was right, and he knew it. In all the months of testing, calibrating, and troubleshooting, he never once sat in the chair himself. It had always been about data points and diagnostic readings, never about the actual experience of riding it. With trembling hands, Cameron approached the chair. It looked smaller up close, more personal. The seat was upholstered in soft gray fabric that his mother would have described as cloud-colored. The armrests were positioned at exactly the right height for comfort, and the footrests gleamed with brushed chrome that caught the lab's fluorescent lights. "Go on," Marla Jean encouraged. "She's waiting for you." Cameron lowered himself into the seat, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The chair embraced him perfectly, the back support exactly right for his spine, the armrests positioned so his shoulders could relax for the first time in months. "Now," Marla Jean said, moving to the chair's control panel, "let's see if your mama can finally dance." She pressed the activation button, and the chair came alive with a soft whisper of motors engaging. The display panel lit up with gentle blue lights, and Cameron felt the subtle vibration of the gyroscopic stabilizers initializing. "Forward first," Marla Jean suggested. Cameron pressed the joystick gently forward, and the chair responded with silk-smooth acceleration. No jerking, no sudden movements, just a gradual, graceful glide across the lab floor. It felt like floating. "Left turn," he whispered, guiding the joystick to the side. The chair pivoted effortlessly, maintaining perfect balance through the entire arc. Cameron could feel the stabilizers working, not as mechanical corrections, but as an extension of his own sense of balance, so seamless he almost forgot they were there. "Right turn." Again, flawless movement. The tiny washer Marla Jean had placed under the wheel made all the difference. What had once been a dangerous tilt was now a smooth, confident turn that felt as natural as walking. Cameron found himself moving in larger circles, then figure eights, then just cruising around the lab with no destination in mind. The chair didn't just move, it danced. Every adjustment he made with the joystick translated into fluid motion that felt more like choreography than transportation. "Oh my God!" he breathed, stopping the chair in the center of the room. "It actually works. It really works." But it was more than that. Sitting in the chair, feeling its responsive grace, Cameron finally understood what his mother had meant about flying. This wasn't just about mobility, it was about freedom. The freedom to move without thinking about movement, to go where you wanted without worrying about falling, to dance again even if your legs couldn't carry you. "There's one more place you need to go," Marla Jean said softly. She pointed toward the lab's large observation window, the same window where Cameron had spent countless hours staring at his failed tests. But now he saw what she meant. Beyond the glass, at the far end of the building, another window looked out over the city lights. Cameron guided the chair toward the corridor, Marla Jean walking silently beside him. They moved through the darkened hallways of Dynatech, past empty offices and sleeping computers, until they reached the executive conference room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. The city stretched out below them, thousands of lights twinkling like earthbound stars. But Cameron's attention was drawn to something else, his own reflection in the window. For a moment, in the dark glass, he could almost see another figure beside him. Silver hair, kind eyes, a smile that had never quite left even through all the pain. "She's proud of you," Marla Jean whispered. Cameron reached out and touched the window, his palm flat against the cool glass. "Mom," he said quietly, "I kept my promise. You can fly now." In the distance, a bird landed on the building's fire escape, just like the ones his mother used to watch from her hospital window. It spread its wings once, as if testing them, then took off into the night sky. Cameron sat in perfect silence, balanced and whole, finally understanding that some promises take longer to keep than others, but they're always worth the wait. For several minutes, Cameron and Marla Jean stood in the conference room, watching the city lights blur through Cameron's tears. The chair hummed quietly beneath him, its motors maintaining perfect stability even as his shoulders shook with emotion he'd been holding back for 3 years. "I can't," he started, then stopped, his voice catching. "I can't believe she's gone and she'll never get to ride this." Marla Jean moved closer, her hand coming to rest gently on his shoulder. "Oh honey, she already has." Cameron looked up at her, confused. "Every night you stayed late working on this machine, she was riding it in your heart. Every time you pushed through another failure, she was right there pushing with you. Every time you wanted to quit and didn't, that was her, reminding you that promises matter." Marla Jean's voice was soft but certain. "She's been riding this chair for 3 years, Mr. Doyle. Tonight was just the first time you joined her." That broke something loose inside Cameron, some dam he'd built to hold back the grief, the exhaustion, the overwhelming weight of trying to solve the unsolvable. He stood up from the chair and for a moment just stood there, swaying slightly, as if he'd forgotten how to support himself without its help. Then he collapsed. Not physically, the chair was there to catch him as he sank back down, but emotionally. 3 years of holding himself together, of being the brilliant CEO who had all the answers, of carrying the weight of his mother's memory and 56 experts' expectations, all came pouring out in great, heaving sobs that echoed off the conference room windows. "I'm sorry," he gasped between breaths. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I tried so hard. I made everything so complicated when all you wanted was something simple. Something that would let you dance." Marla Jean knelt beside the chair, and without asking permission, she pulled Cameron into a hug. He was taller than her, broader, probably twice her weight, but in that moment he felt small and lost, like a child who'd been wandering in the dark for too long. "She knows, baby. She knows." They stayed like that until Cameron's breathing steadied and the tears slowed to occasional drops. When he finally pulled back, Marla Jean was crying too, but her smile was radiant. "Thank you," Cameron whispered. "Not just for fixing the chair. For knowing her. For being with her when I couldn't. She was easy to love," Marla Jean said simply. Cameron wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, then looked at the chair with new eyes. "What you did tonight, solving what 56 experts couldn't, that's extraordinary. You saved this project. You saved my company. Hell, you probably saved my sanity." Marla Jean chuckled, standing up and smoothing down her uniform. "I just did what needed doing. Same as I do every night." "No," Cameron said, his voice growing stronger. "This is different. This matters." He paused, an idea forming. "The press is going to want to know about this. The breakthrough, the solution. They'll want to know how we solved it." "Well, you just tell them your 56 experts figured it out," Marla Jean said, reaching for her mop bucket. "Absolutely not." Cameron's voice was firm now, decisive in a way it hadn't been for months. "They're going to know exactly who solved this and how. And there's something else." He stood up from the chair, facing her directly. "This chair is going to change lives. Thousands of people who are waiting for their chance to dance again. They deserve to know who made it possible." 3 months later, Cameron stood on a stage at the National Mobility Device Conference, looking out at an audience of engineers, medical professionals, and potential users. Behind him, a large screen displayed the official product announcement. The Marla model, balanced, not just built. He told the whole story, the months of failure, the brilliant team that couldn't see past their own expertise, and the cleaning lady who solved it all with a 5-cent washer and 30 years of her father's wheelbarrow wisdom. The audience had been skeptical at first, then amazed, then moved to standing ovation when he explained Marla Jean's connection to his mother. In the front row, Marla Jean sat wearing a new dress Cameron had insisted on buying her, looking slightly overwhelmed but proud. Beside her sat Dr. Chin and the rest of his engineering team, who had spent the past months redesigning their entire testing protocol to include what they now called the Marla method: hands-on, common-sense evaluation before complex technical analysis. The Marla model has taught us something important, Cameron said, wrapping up his presentation. Sometimes the most sophisticated problems require the simplest solutions. Sometimes the most important innovations come not from adding complexity, but from removing it. And sometimes the person with the answer isn't the one with the most degrees on the wall, it's the one who's been paying attention while everyone else was looking the other way. Later, as the conference attendees lined up to test drive the chairs, Cameron found Marla Jean standing by the display model, running her fingers along its armrest. "Any regrets about leaving the cleaning business?" he asked. She'd accepted his offer to head the new customer experience department, designed to ensure that real people, not just computers, tested every product Initech developed. "Only one," she said with a grin. "I'm going to miss humming in empty hallways. Turns out folks in offices during the day aren't much for gospel music." Cameron laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "I think we can make an exception for the woman who taught 56 experts how to see." As conference attendees climbed into the Marla model chairs and glided smoothly across the exhibition floor, Cameron watched elderly users smile like children, paralyzed veterans navigate with confidence, and families cry with joy as their loved ones moved with grace they thought was lost forever. Stamped beneath every seat, exactly as he promised, was a small metal plate with simple words. "Balanced, not just built." But in smaller text beneath that, visible only to those who looked closely, was another message. "In loving memory of Eleanor Doyle, who taught us that promises matter, and in honor of Marla Jean Washington, who taught us that the best solutions come from the heart." At the end of the day, as the exhibition hall emptied, Cameron found himself alone with one of the demonstration chairs. He sat down, pressed the joystick forward, and began to move in slow circles around the empty space. In the silence, he could almost hear his mother humming,